What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Cinematic Reviews. As always, I am your host, Chris, and this, of course, is the show about all these movies and TV. Well, it's good to be back in the studio recording for y'all today. We got another Marvel episode with Ant-Man. This will close out Phase 2 of our journey through the MCU. That means next time we will kick off Phase 3 with one of my favorite Marvel movies of all time, Captain America: Civil War. But I do love Ant-Man. I love the Paul Rudd character that he brings to this. It's going to be a fun show today. We also have some interesting news that broke too while I was on vacation, as well as a couple of reactions. One of the reactions actually is from one of the movies I saw down in Mexico when I was on my trip. So I'm excited to talk about that movie, as well as the theater that I saw it in. Then we'll also get into all the rankings, the villain scale, the MCU ranking, and of course the popcorn rating for the Ant-Man film. So a lot to cover on the show. But before we get into all that, wanted to throw out some reminders. If you are new to the show, you can watch the show every week at youtube.com/the cinematic reviews. You can also listen to the audio version on your favorite platform. This includes Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also watch the show now on Spotify if that is your platform of choice. So go ahead and check that out. Also follow the social media pages, Facebook, X, and Instagram. Just search for Cinematic Reviews and you will find it. I post a lot of the breaking news and everything else coming out of Hollywood, as well as all the artwork from each and every episode. So from this episode, I'll post all those cool artworks and graphics that I make for the show myself. Very, very exciting. Also, if you are new to the show, thank you for joining in. We've been doing this podcast for about 3 years now. It's been a lot of fun. Before, it was just a audio podcast. Just recently, last year, it turned into a video podcast, which has really opened up the possibilities of the show. And I appreciate everyone that has supported the show to make that happen here at Quantum Podcast. So I'm very, very excited for 2026. There's a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline as far as episodes. Of course, we'll get the conclusion of Marvel Friday in December with Avengers Doomsday. That's right. A new Avengers movie comes out this year. We can finally say that, and it's very, very exciting. So before we get into Ant-Man, let's head over to news and reactions to see what is up with Hollywood. So first up, we'll cover 3 pieces of news that broke while I was in Mexico, and then we'll talk about the 2 reactions that I'm super excited to cover as well. First up, Kathleen Kennedy has stepped down as Lucasfilm head. This was kind of a shocker, but it also wasn't very surprising at the same time, if that makes any sense. You know, Star Wars has been kind of in this lull period of really hit and miss part of its saga here at Disney, similar to what Marvel has gone through in recent years. So Kathleen Kennedy has officially stepped down as president of Lucasfilm after 14 years. I completely forgot that it has already been 14 years since she has been elected president of Lucasfilm. But with her stepping down, that of course brings her replacement, and that is Mr. Dave Filoni, who has made quite a name for himself being involved with the Star Wars Clone Wars series, the Mandalorian series, and a bunch of other parts of Lucasfilm. He has been promoted to president and chief creative officer of Lucasfilm. Alongside him, president and GM of Lucasfilm Business, Lynwen Brennan, will act as co-president along with Filoni. So we have a duo pair here to lead Lucasfilm into another era of his history in Hollywood. So I'm very hopeful that they can get things back on track for Lucasfilm. I really respect and like Dave Filoni as a creator, as a producer, as a director. He's done a great job with the Star Wars saga, so it makes the most sense to have him be Kathleen Kennedy's replacement as the president of Lucasfilm. Switching over to Warner Brothers, who will probably soon be under the Netflix umbrella. Still waiting on some big breaking news from that whole chaos that has unfolded between Warner Brothers, Netflix, and Paramount. But Hans Zimmer, the legendary composer, will compose the score of HBO's Harry Potter series. If you are not known to this, Hans Zimmer is my favorite composer of all time. So to have him compose Harry Potter is just like my wish, my make a wish, request is my favorite composer in one of my favorite franchises of all time. I'm super excited for this. I can't wait to hear his rendition of that beautiful Harry Potter theme music, along with everything else going on in the series. That series, of course, will hit HBO sometime in 2027. They're currently filming it now, and that'll, of course, be a season per book. So we're looking at anywhere from 7 to 10 series, depending on how they want to stretch out this story. But it's very, very exciting to have Hans Zimmer join as the composer. I've been really kind of on the fence with this series, with the castings, with the theories and speculations that have been coming out, with what the story is going to be, what kind of version of the beloved series that they're going to do. Some of the casting choices have been, really enticing to me. But there's a couple of them that I'm curious to see how they do this. But having a legendary composer such as Hans Zimmer is incredible, and it makes me super, super excited now for this series. Last bit of news. It's kind of an Oscar related news here. Sinners has made history by getting 16 nominations in this year's Oscars. The Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler horror film, of course, that came out last spring, is now the most nominated film of all time with 16 nominations. I'm excited to see how many of those nominations turn into winners. I believe Lord of the Rings has the most with 11, I think. Let me check that real quick. Because I think The Return of the King had the previous record for the most nominations, but now with Sinners taking 16, that is the number to beat. But I want to just make sure I'm getting this right as the most Oscar wins for a film. And I think that was Lord of the Rings Return of the King. Yes. The long-held record is shared by 3 iconic movies: The Lord of the Rings Return of the King, Titanic, and Ben-Hur. This will... Let's see how many was... That was 11 Oscars, so I was right. So Titanic, Ben-Hur, and Return of the King currently have the record for 11. We'll see if the Sinners can beat that. With it getting nominated 16 times, there's a pretty decent chance that it could at least get 10, maybe even upwards of like 12 or 14. But that's very exciting either way with 16 nominations. That tells me that the Academy absolutely love Sinners, and it's looking like it could dominate the Oscars this year, much like what was that one film a couple years ago? Everything Everywhere All at Once basically swiped all the big Oscar winners that year. So Sinners is looking like that could be this year's Everything Everywhere All at Once. But it wasn't my film of the year if you watch the Cinematic Awards episode on the show, but it was in my top 5, and it did win horror film of the year. So I absolutely loved it. It's a top 5 film of 2025 for sure. And of course, it was, in my opinion, the best horror film out there. So go ahead and check out that Cinematic Awards show episode that came out a few weeks ago. That was kind of my version of the Oscars, because I just haven't really been a fan of the Oscars in the last probably 10 or 12 years for many, many reasons. Partly because it has been just put together as just a show. It doesn't really honor the films. It leaves a lot of films out that should have been recognized. And that's where you have to kind of watch the Golden Globes and some of those other lesser advertised shows versus the Oscars, which leaves a lot of it on the table. And I don't agree with how the Academy views a lot of these films, of course. So check out Cinematic Reviews' award show episode, which came out a few weeks ago, to see how I felt about 2025. But Sinners, I'm very excited for Sinners. That's 16 nominations is a lot. And I'm very, very excited to see Ryan Coogler and Michael B. Jordan get the recognition for their hard work, because that is a truly, truly incredible film. One of the best films of the year for sure. One of the best films of this decade, last decade, this century. It really changes the vampire genre, the horror genre altogether. And it's just truly incredible film. It's good to see them get recognized for that. So that kind of wraps up all the news. Let's get into those reactions. So the first one is the newest Brendan Fraser film that came out last year, Rental Family. If you're not familiar with this one, this is where Brendan Fraser's character Philip is a commercial actor for the most part in Tokyo, Japan. He's kind of down in his luck. He's having a hard time finding jobs, or he really wants to be a part of a popular TV series so that he has a cushion or a basically nailed down job instead of bouncing from audition to audition. He kind of wants more security in his career. This is where he stumbles across this business where you rent people out in your life. Now, this is an actual thing that does happen in Japan. Brendan Fraser's character Philip takes on numerous jobs, like becoming a best friend with a very enclosed gamer who just realizes that he needs some kind of human interactions in his life. He also takes a job where he sort of becomes a really good friend and mentor to this older gentleman who is a kind of an iconic figure in Tokyo, Japan, where he poses as a novelist who's here to write his story. And they end up becoming a really good friends. The main job that the movie kind of really circles around is where Brendan Fraser is hired to be the father of this little girl who has basically grown up without a father. They hatch this story of how he's been in America this whole time, and now he's back to be in her life. And it's a way for people to get those human interactions in whichever way they feel comfortable. Like I said, for this one, the mother felt that her little daughter needed a father, so they hired the Rental Family organization, and Brendan Fraser ended up getting a job. It's a really delightful film. I saw this, of course, in Mexico, like I said, at one of the movie theaters there. This was one of the nicest theaters that I've ever been to, so shout out to them. It's a VIP theater, as they call it. It has the big comfy seats, big screens. They actually serve the concessions to your seat. So they have a little call button there on your seat, a little table for you to eat on, and the little waiter guy comes out and brings you your food as you order it. It's really, really awesome experience. Big screen, loud sounds, really good lighting. It was a great atmosphere to watch this movie. Of course, with it being in Mexico, a lot of it was subtitled in Spanish, and then some of it was speaking in Japanese, which I know very, very little Japanese, but it was still a really good experience. There was plenty of English to understand what was going on and really enjoy the film. So, looking at the popcorn rating for Rental Family, let me pull that up here. I give it 3 popcorn buckets. So, it didn't blow my hair off. It didn't really shock and awe me, but it's a really touching story about finding your place in life and doing something that you absolutely love, like podcasting, for example. I never would have thought I'd be doing podcasting, but here I am 3 years later with not only a movie podcast, but a football podcast as well. So it's just, this movie really kind of spoke to me in that way of just kind of finding your place in life and doing something that you are talented in and something that you really enjoy, and kind of making a profit off it or a career out of it. So 3 popcorn buckets for Rental Family. I believe it is now streaming for you to own, and then eventually it will hit the streaming services. But if you can find it in a theater, go ahead and support the local theater and check it out. It's a really, really nice, touching family movie to watch. And of course, everybody loves Brendan Fraser. He has had kind of a resurgence in his life, and this is a great film to put in his kind of feather in his cap for. So check out Rental Family today. The next reaction is a streaming one. This is Netflix's The Rip, starring Matt Damon and Ben Affleck once again. Of course, these two guys are legendary as being best friends in Hollywood, starring in a few films together, writing Good Will Hunting together. They've been just lifelong best friends. This one, to kind of give you a quick synopsis of it, they're a group of Miami cops that discover a stash of millions of dollars in this home that they received. They supposedly received a tip of it being only like $300,000. It turns out that this is like a $20 million score, and they are scrambling to figure out how to do this. Do they turn the money in? Do they keep it? What kind of backstabbing goes on? So it's a really it's a really self-contained movie. There's not very many locations, not a really large cast. It's pretty self-contained, pretty small. But I do love a good cop, FBI, CIA, whatever movie. And this was pretty entertaining. But it didn't blow my hair off. I was kind of expecting more by the way they like advertise this, and plus it's Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. So I was a little bit kind of not really disappointed, but not really like amazed by it as much as I wanted to. But it's still a really good watch, especially if you're already paying for Netflix. Go ahead and throw it on. If you love Matt Damon, if you love Ben Affleck, go ahead and give this a watch because they really do act their butts off, and the action in here is really good. I love the gunfights in here. The way that they were able to do all the stunts and the action work behind scenes is really cool. Some of the other casts you probably know, like Steven Yeun, who played Glenn, of course, in The Walking Dead. Kyle Chandler pops up as one of the DEA agents. Scott Adkins is in here as the FBI agent. So it still has a pretty high caliber cast as well as Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. So for the popcorn rating for this one, I was hoping it was going to be a little more exciting and more amazed, but it's still a really good movie. So I'm giving it 3 popcorn buckets, just like Rental Family. Like I said, it didn't blow my wig off. It didn't like completely amaze me, but it's still a really good action cop film about ripping off drug stashes and trying to do the right thing, I guess, in your career. So I'm giving The Rip on Netflix 3 popcorn buckets. Go ahead and check out The Rip today with your Netflix subscription. So that'll do that for today as far as news and reactions. Let's head over to our feature film today, which is Ant-Man, starring Paul Rudd and Michael Douglas.
Scott, I've been watching you for a while now. You're different. Now, don't let anyone tell you that you have nothing to offer. Second chances don't come around all that often. I suggest you take a really close look at it. This is your chance to earn that look in your daughter's eyes, to become the hero that she already thinks you are. It's not about saving our world. It's about saving theirs. Scott, I need you to be the Ant-Man.
Huh. One question. Is it too late to change the name?
So Ant-Man is another film that Marvel tried to expand this universe in with, much like Guardians of the Galaxy, where we went to space, trying to expand this giant universe that they had been creating at the time. And now we kind of go back down to Earth, but we kind of switch gears a little bit with going to San Francisco instead of New York this time, with Paul Rudd's character Scott Lang, who becomes Ant-Man. Now, of course, this is different than what most people are probably familiar with as far as the comics. Michael Douglas character Hank Pym is the most iconic Ant-Man, but with Disney trying to do more of like the ultimate versions of these characters, different iterations of it, not doing the obvious ones. I thought it was a neat choice to do it with the Scott Lang character and Paul Rudd and make Hank Pym more of a legendary mentor, which I do think was really awesome. We'll get more into that too into the episode. To start off with, of course, this came out back in July 17th, 2015. So we're going on the 11th year here. Wow, it's already been 11 years since Ant-Man came out. I remember when this one was even before it was like a teaser trailer, like being talked about as part of this new MCU, and I was like, Ant-Man, that's interesting. We haven't even got a live action Ant-Man, which is really cool. We've only seen him in like the cartoons back in the 90s, with those Avengers shows. With the ridiculously big ant metal helmet and the skin tight red suit. Now they kind of went with more of a biker suit with also paying homage to that Ant-Man silver helmet. Now, this suit in particular, I haven't really been a big fan of. When we get into the sequels, and then with him in the Avengers movies and the Captain America movies, I like his suit in there much better. I was never really on board with this biker style and just the color patterns that they chose, but I do end up liking his suit a lot coming into the sequels. Looking at the box office here real quick before we start diving into the cast, it had $130 million budget, and it made a whopping $519 million. This was a big hit for Marvel, being one of their lesser known, not really biggest popular characters, and making a huge profit on it. That is really awesome. And of course, it's Paul Rudd, Michael Douglas. It's got an incredible cast. So let's kind of dive into it. We haven't really talked about Paul Rudd before on the podcast, so this is a great time more than anything. So Paul Rudd, like I said, plays Scott Lang. This is the MCU's version, or the current version of Ant-Man. Like I said, Michael Douglas plays this more of a legendary mentor figure to Scott, who was the original Ant-Man during World War II times. Now Scott has been chosen as his successor in the Ant-Man suit. Paul Rudd has had an incredible career. A lot of his early 2000s were spent doing those Judd Apatow comedy films, and that was kind of like his sphere there with Michael Cera and Jonah Hill and Seth Rogen, Bill Hader, that crowd of people. Steve Carell was also in there. So he has had quite a career. I think the first thing I ever saw him in was actually in Friends. He popped up there as a kind of a recurring guest star on Friends. Trying to pull up his filmography here so I can get his character's name right in Friends, if I can find it. I really don't like how IMDb organizes us here. All right, here's the actor one. So he played Tommy Doyle in Halloween, Curse of Michael Myers. He was in Romeo plus Juliet, which I remember. So he was in Clueless. See, I didn't see Clueless until after Friends. But that looks like that was like his bigger blockbuster film alongside Alicia Silverstone. Where I am not seeing him up here. Might have to Google it. Oh, here we go. Friends. Mike Hannigan. He was in 16 episodes. Jesus, I don't remember that many, but kudos to him. And then this is where after that's where he kind of kicks off this Judd Apatow era with Anchorman, with The Daily Show, with 40-Year-Old Virgin. He also pops up in Night Museum with Ben Stiller. Then he goes into Knocked Up, another Judd Apatow film. He appeared in 5 episodes of Reno 911, Forgetting Sarah Marshall as Chuck, which I remember there. Then he goes on to do Role Models with Sean William Scott, I Love You Man, Year One with Jack Black and Michael Cera. This is 40, which is actually a sequel to the 40-Year-Old Virgin, if you did not know that. Or no, I mean Knocked Up, excuse me. Not 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up. Then he did This Is the End. Then he did Anchorman 2, the sequel to the original ones. He appeared in Marks and Rex for 5 episodes. And then 2015 is where he gets Ant-Man, and this kind of catapults him into another category or sphere of Hollywood. And it kicks off this other phase of his career with now he's a part of the MCU. So he's in Captain America. He's in Ant-Man and the Wasp, the Avengers movies. He does Ant-Man Quantumania, and now he's set to probably return in Avengers Doomsday and potentially another Ant-Man film. But then he hops ship into another franchise with Ghostbusters, and then he had the most recent film Anaconda that came out towards the end of 2025, which I hear wasn't that great. It's kind of like a retelling of the Anaconda film alongside Jack Black. So he has had quite an interesting career. A lot of it spent with the Judd Apatow era with those comedies, and then switching over to the superhero franchise. But Paul Rudd is a national treasure. I think he's hilarious. He's incredible as Ant-Man, Scott Lang in this universe, and I absolutely love it. He is the main reason why I love these Ant-Man movies so much. I know a lot of people crap on Quantumania a lot, and when we get into that episode, I'm going to die on that hill defending it, because I do think it's a good movie and a very entertaining film also, and it all comes down to Paul Rudd and his take on the Ant-Man, and I think it was a terrific casting for this MCU's Ant-Man. Next up on the list, Michael Douglas, like I mentioned. He plays Hank Pym, who is the original Ant-Man, who is now a mentor slash icon in the science world of the MCU. Michael Douglas, I don't think we've had really much of a chance either to talk about this legendary actor. He has had quite an incredible career. He's been in so many films. I'm trying to think of the one that I've seen him in first. And I think the first one I ever saw him in was, what was it? I think it was Ghosts of Girlfriends Past, believe it or not, that rom-com with Matthew McConaughey and Jennifer Gardner, where it's a retelling of the Ghosts of Christmas Past with Scrooge, where we have McConaughey here as the Scrooge, kind of looking back on his previous relationships and realizing that Jennifer Gardner was the one that he should have been with the entire time. Michael Douglas, of course, plays his Uncle Wayne in here. I think that was the first time I ever saw Michael Douglas. And then eventually I discovered some of his other films, like The Game, which he's fantastic in, the David Fincher film. What else did he do? Fatal Attraction. I ended up seeing that one later on as well. What else was there? There's one more I'm missing here, and I can't think of it. I think Fatal Attraction's the one I really wanted to mention. That's an incredible film. Definitely check it out if you haven't seen it. And then he kind of goes into an interesting part where he joins Marvel, like I said. So now he's tied to a franchise. And yeah, that's really all I'm really familiar with Michael Douglas. It's an actor that I didn't really like get drawn to when I was growing up watching all these movies. I know the Wall Street movies, I didn't see those until I was in college, but I knew of it. I knew of the Gordon Gekko character. I think in one of my accounting or business classes I took in college, we actually watched scenes from both Wall Street and then Wall Street Money Never Sleeps. Eventually, I got really interested in the Gordon Gekko character and stocks and all that. So I ended up finding those two movies on streaming services at the time and watching those. So that's another, I guess, small franchise that he's been a part of as well. I wonder if they ever talked about doing a third Wall Street and bringing back the Gordon Gekko character. That would be pretty interesting if they did that. But yeah, Michael Douglas, legendary actor. Really, really cool as a Hank Pym. I'm really glad that they chose him as the original Ant-Man to kind of mentor Scott Lang. And they have an interesting chemistry dynamic throughout this movie and even into the sequels, where right off the bat that Hank chose Scott for a reason, because he sees something in Scott and he's trying to help Scott realize that. And we'll get into the dad and daughter aspect of this movie, which is a huge part of this. And he He himself embodies that with his daughter Hope, who we'll talk about right now, actually, who's played by Evangeline Lilly, who has had quite an interesting uh last few years with her, her political views and stuff like that. And we won't get into that. I don't like to get political on this podcast. I want to focus more on the actors, the performances, the movies itself. But she has been in some hot water with Disney over the years. She's an actress that I haven't really been familiar with either until she became Wasp in the Marvel universe. Of course, I saw her before she was in Ant-Man with the Hobbit films, but before that, I really wasn't a huge fan. Like she was in Real Steel with Hugh Jackman. I didn't see that until after I saw her in Ant-Man and the Hobbit. Freddy versus Jason, I never really remembered her. I guess she's uncredited. That's why I don't remember her. She was in 4 episodes of Smallville, and I don't remember her being in Smallville either. I'm going to have to rewatch that show. Apparently, she was in The Hurt Locker. I don't remember her in The Hurt Locker either. So, really, my relationship with Evangeline Lilly spawns from the Hobbit movies and the Ant-Man movies in Marvel. And those are probably the biggest things that she's done in her career and what she's probably going to be best known for. She was uncredited in White Chicks. I don't even remember her in White Chicks. So, but she's had an interesting career, not a really stellar career, but I like her as Hope Van Dyne. If you haven't seen the movie in a while, she of course has a very tumultuous relationship with Hank Pym, her dad, after the death of her mother, who was the original Wasp. She ended up dying in a mission that her and Hank went on, and I guess Hope has really kind of resented, or the relationship was really torn between her and her dad after that death. Her wanting to step into the Wasp role, but Hank being really nervous and scared to put his own daughter in danger because he lost his wife doing these missions. And throughout the Ant-Man series of the MCU, we start to see him realize that Hope isn't her mom, that she is her own superhero and that she can take care of herself. And they end up, rekindling their father-daughter relationship, especially when her mother ends up being alive this whole time and she comes back. So spoiler alert there if you haven't seen those movies, but she does end up coming back. But I think she does a pretty decent job as Hope Van Dyne, aka Wasp, in the MCU. Looking at some of the other side characters here, Cassie Lang, of course, is the daughter of Scott Lang, which is a huge part of this movie. The father-daughter dynamic is very important in here, which is a big change for Marvel. We previously got that family dynamic in Age of Ultron with Hawkeye's family being introduced. Before that, it was, Captain America, who was a soldier, didn't have a family, aside from Bucky, who was his best friend. Tony hasn't really had a family either. He was butting heads with his dad a lot growing up, and then eventually his parents die, so he basically is alone except for Happy and Pepper. And this is the one where, it really sets the stakes for one of our heroes, where they have a daughter that they have to protect, and is the reason that they are a superhero, is to become the superhero that they already think they are, which is a good line from Hank in this movie, where he's trying to get Scott to understand that be the hero that your daughter already believes that you are. And I think that's a good message to all the dads out there. Be the hero that your kids think you are already. And this is one of the reasons why I really, really like these Ant-Man movies, because it sets that unique stake that we don't get to see in a lot of these Marvel movies, where our hero has a kid, and that is why he has become a superhero, because their kids already see them as a superhero, and now they want to embody that vision and live up to that belief in their kids. And it's really, really touching story, and it's a really good part and enjoyable part of the MCU that I really, really like. So that's a big reason why I love these Ant-Man movies, as well, as you'll see in my rankings when we go through these. But yeah, so Cassie Lang is played by Abby Ryder Fortson, who I really only know her as Cassie Lang in this movie. Eventually, Cassie ends up getting recasted in the Quantumania films by I'm drawing a blank on her name now. Let me pull up Quantumania here. There we go. Quantumania. Catherine Newton. I knew that. I should have known that. So Cassie ends up getting recasted because of the age and all that. I wish they would have kept the original actress. I've mentioned this before on the podcast a few times. I hate it when they recast the same character and for a dumb reason like age gaps or time gaps. Like they could have made it work. They could have brought Abby Ryder Fortson back. Nothing against Catherine Newton. I think she does a good job as Cassie and Quantumania, but it kind of sucks when they recast these actors. Luis, who is a big fan favorite, he only appears in the Ant-Man movies. I know a lot of people have been hoping that he would come back for Doomsday, but it sounds like Michael Pena is done with Marvel. He's not coming back with the Luis character, but he's great. I absolutely love Michael Pena. We talked about him a lot in the End of Watch episode that we did, so go ahead and check that out if you want. That's the cop film with him and Jake Gyllenhaal as LAPD partners. But he's the Luis character. It's so entertaining when he recaps stuff or he's telling a story, and he gets that really cool Luis voice, and he's check this out, and you get that flashback of different scenes as he's talking, and it's really cool how they did it, where the characters in that flashback are all talking like Michael Pena. It was a really, really cool aspect of it, and he's a big comedy factor in this movie, alongside Paul Rudd, of course, but he's very entertaining. I love the Luis character. I think we really do need an episode of a show or some kind of short within the Marvel universe where Luis recaps the entire MCU. Like that would be incredibly awesome. Or if he just recaps the battle against Thanos, like just have him recap anything. It's so entertaining. Love Michael Pena. And then the other two guys in their little group that they end up forming the security business with in the sequels, we have Kurt and Dave, who are kind of entertaining in their own way. They get more to do in the sequels. In here, they're kind of throwing one-liners out there or just kind of being a part of the group, but still very entertaining. Then we have Maggie, played by Judy Greer, who is Scott Lang's ex-wife, and then now her new fiance, Paxton, played by Bobby Cannavale, who is a comedy god as well. He's great. He's a cop, and it's funny how she ends up being engaged to a cop when Scott Lang is a criminal. But to give you backstory on there, if you don't remember, Scott was incarcerated for stealing from rich people and giving back to the people that rich people stole it from. So he's kind of your modern day Robin Hood, and one of the reasons why Hank chose Scott as well was that he was a man of the people. He wanted to do the right thing, and he unfortunately paid the price for it with a criminal record, and that's why he's forced to work at Baskin Robbins until Baskin Robbins finds out and he gets fired. So he has to go to a crime, burglary to be specific. He wants to make that very clear that he's not a robber. He is a burglar because he does not cause harm. And he's a really good engineer. Like he even mentions, he has a degree in engineering. That's how he's able to get past a lot of the security systems and make away with the stuff. So, some other cameos we'll talk about here before we get into some of the other notes that I wanted before we get into iconic scenes and all that. Some big cameos in here. We got John Slattery returning as Howard Stark. Haley Atwell returns as Peggy Carter. And Anthony Mackie returns as Sam Wilson, a.k.a. Falcon, in that really cool scene at the Avengers compound where Ant-Man fights Falcon, which is really cool. So some really big universe building, universe connecting cameos that was great. And to see how Howard Stark, Peggy Carter, and Hank Pym were all kind of really good friends, really good colleagues back in the day, and they kind of formed the first iteration of Shield, which was really cool to see at the very beginning of this film in that flashback. So a lot more universe building too, which is really really cool. The director, we got to talk about the director here for a little bit because this was a big controversy when this movie was coming out, and it still kind of is now. So Peyton Reed was ended up being the director of this film, but before that, Edgar Wright was attached to this. He had a whole script. They were going to start filming, but Edgar Wright had a lot of arguments, decisions making arguments on how they really wanted to do this film. Edgar Wright hasn't really been a big fan of universe building. He likes his movies to be kind of little self-contained stories, and that's what he wanted to do with Ant-Man. He didn't want it to be a part of this big MCU that they were creating, but that's not what Marvel wanted in their agenda at the time. They wanted Ant-Man to be another pillar to grow this universe, much like Guardians of the Galaxy was, and that just didn't go well with Edgar Wright, so they ended up parting ways, and then they went with Peyton Reed, who hasn't really had that lucrative of a career as a director. He did direct a couple episodes of The Mandalorian. Of course, he did the three Ant-Man movies. He did some episodes of New Girl. He directed Yes Man, The Breakup. Some comedy movies there. He did Bring It On, which is another iconic movie from the 2000s, but not a really one of the big iconic directors, but he has been a part of some films that really really like. I think he did a good job here. Supposedly the rumor is, and I can't remember if they fully took the script or they took pieces of it, but they did use some aspects of Edgar Wright's original script to kind of bring this movie back to where they wanted it to. And then, of course, Marvel stepping in and introducing what aspects of the universe building they wanted for it. And I have a few things on there with the director and the direction of that and fun facts. So I'll save that. But I wanted to at least mention the Edgar Wright debacle, exit, whatever you want to call it, between him and Marvel, because that was a big public thing that was going around this movie, and I just needed to mention it. But Peyton Reed ended up pulling it off here, and like I said, I do love the Ant-Man movies, mostly because of the performances, but also the story and everything else in there. So I do want to give Peyton Reed his flowers on making a very entertaining movie. Some other notes here. I've mentioned it already. This is a side story, much like Guardians of the Galaxy, where they're really expanding this universe. Eventually, when we get into, Black Panther, we get more into Vision and Wanda and Doctor Strange, and then eventually Spider-Man comes in. We really start to expand the MCU in phase 3. But it really starts in phase 2 with Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man being two kind of side stories, but also interconnected with the overall universe. So that was really cool. This is where we really start to get all those branches and different parts of the MCU coming to life. And it's really, really cool to have Ant-Man, early on as it is, be a success and be one of the pillars of the MCU for a good chunk of the time. I really do like the choice of Scott Lang. I mentioned it already. And instead of going with Hank seemed like the obvious choice. And I like that Marvel is kind of going away with the obvious choices and dipping into the characters that people normally didn't grow up with. The ultimate versions. Like, historically, the Marvel has stated that Tom Holland's Spider-Man takes a lot from the Ultimate Universe, which not a lot of people are too familiar with. They're more associated with the original, versions of these characters. Scott Lang is more into the alternate reality, alternate versions or successors, so to speak, of these original characters, which is really cool. So I like the decision of the Scott Lang over the Hank Pym. I know when this movie is coming out, a lot of people had some gripes over that and they weren't big fans of it. They're like, Hank is the original. Hank is what we grew up with. We want Hank. But I do understand that Marvel wants to also be a little bit different than the comics. They want to do this movie version of what the comics are, but also at the same time honoring them. So I get the want and desire to change it up a little bit, not do the cookie cutter or the, you know, expected thing to do with this. So I think picking Scott Lang over Hank Pym was a really, really good choice. And then what we also introduce into the MCU is a quantum realm, which at the time I wasn't really familiar with because Ant-Man comics weren't things that I was picking up and reading. I was familiar with Ant-Man. I watched the original Marvel Avengers shows back in the day in the 90s and early 2000s. But the quantum realm was something I wasn't really associated with or knew much of until I watched this movie. And then we get into, Ant-Man and the Wasp and Quantumania, where we get a lot of bit more education on what the quantum realm is. It's another like microscopic universe out there in the multiverse. And of course, at the end of the film, we get to experience that a little bit. And then, of course, the sequels really dive into it more, especially when we get to Avengers Endgame, where they use the quantum realm to basically time travel, so to speak. So this is kind of like peeking back the curtain a tiny bit on what the MCU was going to dive into a little bit more later on. So that was really cool. And that was a really cool aesthetic, the way the universe looked, the echoings of Cassie's voice, the really cool color patterns of organisms around Scott, and it was really, really cool visually and sound wise too. It was really, really awesome design of the quantum realm in this movie. So let's dive into those iconic scenes, favorite quotes, and fun facts before we kind of wrap up the review today. So again, iconic scenes. This is 5 scenes that when you hear the title Ant-Man, what scenes come to mind first? So the first one that comes to mind is Luis telling Scott about the job. That flashback scene where he's retelling how he came across his job, where he's going like, I talked to this person, this person, this person, this person, and they're all talking like Michael Pena. That is a really iconic scene that a lot of people think of, especially me, when we hear the title Ant-Man. Next one, Scott tries on the suit for the first time. He's in the tub, he's trying on the suit, he's clicking the buttons, and he shrinks down. Luis comes into the bathroom, turns the water on. You get that really cool effect where it's like a giant ocean coming on top of Scott because he's so small. It's really, really cool the way that they came up with this concept of shrinking, and it's a new fun action choreography that they get to experience with the shrinking. It's really, really well done. Then we get that cool interaction with Scott and the Falcon at the Avengers compound, where we get to experience more of the shrinking abilities and the shrink fighting is what I like to call between him and Falcon. It was really, really cool. And then we have the fight inside the briefcase towards the end of the film, where we talk about David Cross, who we're going to wait a little bit until we get to the villain scale. I purposely waited for him on the villain scale, so I kind of skipped over him in the casting section on purpose. But we'll talk about him a little bit here, where towards the end of the film, he has the Yellowjacket suit that he finally was able to replicate the Ant-Man serum or the Pym particle, which is the shrinking potion, so to speak. And they fight inside this briefcase. And it's really cool how they're doing it slow-mo. And you get all like the lifesavers and the iPod and all the papers and pencils flying around. It was a really cool effect. So I think of that scene a lot too when I hear the title. And then, of course, the final battle in Cassie's room, which is very iconic. That's probably, aside from the Luis telling the flashbacks to Scott, I think the final battle in Cassie's room is my favorite scene. I think the most iconic is, of course, Michael Pena doing the retelling of stories. But I think that's an obvious one. So the not so obvious one, I think, is the final battle in Cassie's room, which is very entertaining, where you have them shrunk down on the train set, and you get that really cool point of view back and forth between. We get to see what Scott and Darren are looking at, but then we also get to see from Cassie's point of view on these two little tiny figures jumping on her toys and just making kind of toy noises. But when we zoom in there, it's like a war zone with the big explosions and all the lasers. But what Cassie is seeing is just this train going around, and it's really, really funny. It's a really cool way on how they took the 2 point of views on the shrinking. It was really, really cool. Favorite quotes. This was kind of tough, but I tried to keep it short. This one from Gail. That is one messed up looking dog. Gail is the partner to Bobby Cannavale's character Paxton. When one of the ants accidentally gets thrown with one of like the growing darts versus the shrinking ones. Scott also has ones that'll change things big from small, and one of the ants end up getting hit with it, and it turns into this like dog size ant, and it's running around, and it comes out of the house, and that's when Gail goes, "Oh, that's a messed up looking dog." I chuckle every time at that. This one from Dale, who is the manager of the Baskin Robbins, where he goes, "Baskin Robbins always finds out," of course, referencing when they discovered that Scott was in prison. This one from Scott Lang and Luis, where he goes, "Hey, how's your girl, man?" This is when he picks him up from prison, and then Luis goes, "Oh, she left me. And my mom died too. And my dad got deported. But I got the van." It's a really cool interaction between Luis and Scott, where he's like, "Oh, these bad things happen. But hey, I got the van." So it was pretty cool. This is probably my favorite one. Scott Lang going, "Hi, Peanut." The little cute nickname that he names Cassie is Peanut. For the viewers that don't know, my sister is pretty young. She's only 14. Since the age of like, I don't know, 5 or 6, I had her nickname be Munchkin, and I still call her Munchkin to this day, and I will, even when she's 30 years old, I'll call her Munchkin. So I really relate to this when he calls her Peanut, because it reminds me of calling my sister Munchkin as my little nickname for her. This one from Cassie. "Mommy's so happy you're here. She choked on her drink." That one's pretty funny. This one from Hope. "Did he just say, 'Hi, I'm Scott'?" I like that reaction when he interacts with Falcon. And the first thing Scott does is he takes his mask off and he goes, "Hi, I'm Scott." And Falcon's like, "Who? I'm Falcon, I guess." And Hope's reaction to, like, this is our superhero, and he's already releasing his secret identity to strangers. Is really funny. And then another one from Scott. "I thought Daddy didn't get scared." This, of course, is making fun of Michael Pena when he first shows him the shrinking ability of the suit, and Michael Pena is like, "Yeah, don't worry, Daddy don't get scared." And then Scott shrinks, and he's freaking out because there's a tiny little Scott running around, and then that's when he goes, "I thought Daddy didn't get scared." I like that. Now we get to the fun facts. I had quite a bit of fun facts here. There was a lot of behind the scenes stuff here. Really, really fun. So let's go over these. The Falcon's role in the plot came about after Adam McKay and Paul Rudd went to see Captain America: The Winter Soldier and fell in love with the character. They casually suggested working him into the plot, and Kevin Feige informed them that it would actually make perfect sense since Falcon was now living at the new Avengers compound as of the end of Avengers Age of Ultron, of course. So that was really cool. At first, the film was meant to focus on the original Ant-Man, Hank Pym. However, Pym developed several personalities, one of whom abused his girlfriend, and producers decided he was not family friendly. Instead, the focus shifted to Scott Lang, with Pym as a mentor and supporting character, which is also interesting because they made Scott a criminal. He just got out of prison, but of course they swing that by making him a Robin Hood, where he steals from the rich and gives back to the people that the rich people stole. So that's how they were able to swing that. For the 1980s flashback scene, de-aging VFX were used on the 70-year-old Michael Douglas and the 57-year-old Martin Donovan to make them appear younger, and aging VFX were combined with the wig and makeup for 33-year-old Haley Atwell, who of course played Peggy Carter. She wore that to make her appear older in the film. According to Michael Douglas, the costume for Paul Rudd had to be altered because of his muscles. Rudd had gone on an extensive training and workout regimen in order to build the proper muscle size for a superhero, but Rudd had become so muscular they had to soften his costume up. Good on you, Paul Rudd, for just getting completely jacked. That scene where he's training with Hope and he gets that six pack, that was really cool. Kudos to the dedication from Paul Rudd. Scott's brief work at Baskin Robbins, which was originally going to be at Chipotle, but the company did not like their negative portrayal. The filmmakers considered Jamba Juice, then settled on Baskin Robbins after realizing that the bright colors would be a funny contrast to the dark prison opening. That was really cool. I didn't think of that till I looked up the fun facts, but that was a really cool choice to have this dark, depressing jail, and then to have him go, "Hey, welcome to Baskin Robbins," and this bright pink blue outfit that he's wearing. The laser sounds fired from Yellowjacket's suit are the same sounds of the main gun on an AT-AT from the Star Wars franchise, of course. That was really cool that they incorporated that. And you can, now that you know that, you're probably going to go watch Ant-Man and go, crap, that is an AT-AT. The shrunken down scenes feature a great deal of dust mites, which is a deliberate move by the VFX artists to emphasize an insect's point of view. They see the world in greater detail than a human does. That was really cool. The ants were specifically designed to be less grisly and friendlier than in real life. The ants were generally influenced by Saharan silver ants. They possess longer legs, can use their front legs as arms, and possess a fur coat that make them look shinier and armored. Their movements were slowed down to make them feel like noble beasts. The bullet ants were influenced by Ray Winstone. They were made to look heavier, and their hairs were made thicker to resemble horns. And then the crazy ants were influenced by puppies to act playful and peppy. So a little ant fact there for you on how they went about the personalities of those. Paul Rudd and stuntmen wore actual Ant-Man suits, while Corey Stoll, who plays Yellowjacket, wore a motion capture suit. This decision was made early on when creating and filming with a real Yellowjacket costume was found to be impractical. Makes sense. When you see the design of it, it's like, yeah, that's not really ideal to act in. So motion capture makes sense in that case. The VFX artists decided to incorporate techniques that would make this film different from other shrinking films and give an experimental look to the film. It does seem very experimental, and I like that about this movie. It's really cool. These techniques include macro photography, digital mats of enlarged environments, and then motion capture. Trick photography was also employed, such as close-ups, aerial shots, and long shots with wide lenses were the main techniques employed to get a good ambiance for the Ant-Man and Giant environment. That was really cool. And then the size-shifting VFX, the outlines left by the body or on shrinking, growing, were taken from the original Ant-Man comics and was influenced by stop motion and multiple exposure shots. So those scenes where Scott's shrinking down in size, that was taken from those. That's really, really cool. Some really cool fun facts for you on how they were able to film those. I love reading the behind the scenes on this movie because the shrinking was so unique and so experimental. We never really seen anything like this before, and it's another reason why I love this movie so much. So, yeah, like I said, let's end on that note. I really, really like these Ant-Man movies. I love this first one. I think it's one of the better origin stories within the MCU. We get that dad and daughter connection from both Scott and Cassie, as well as Hank and Hope. We get that mentor-mentee relationship between Hank and Scott, of course. We get that lovers quarrel with Hope and Scott, who end up together. Haven't really talked about the villain for a reason, which we will talk about next. So if you haven't watched Ant-Man in a while, go ahead and watch it. I love these movies. I love Paul Rudd as Scott Lang. It's a really, really cool part of the universe, and I'm super excited to see more of Paul Rudd, hopefully, in the future with the Ant-Man character. So let's wrap up the show like we always do with the rankings. So for the rankings, we'll go through the MCU ranking. We'll do the villain scale. We'll finally talk about the villain, and then we'll end on that popcorn rating. With the MCU ranking, there's 50 plus projects So we'll just kind of go over what's around Ant-Man in that ranking. So I have Ant-Man at 20 out of 52 projects. It'll be 53 once Wonder Man comes out, I believe, next week. So looking at 21, WandaVision, 22, Black Panther, 23, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, 24, The Avengers, and then 25, the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. Above it, this is where I put all the Ant-Mans. We've got 19, Ant-Man and the Wasp, 18, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. Yes, Ant-Man, Quantumanium is my favorite Ant-Man that I like. I know that's probably crazy, or a lot of you have that probably on the bottom of your list, but that is my favorite Ant-Man. I really, really like it, and I'm super excited to do the rewatch for the Marvel Friday. At 17, Thunderbolts, 16, Iron Man, and then at 15, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which we'll be talking about a little later on in Phase 3. So that's where I slotted Ant-Man. I don't really see it moving up any further than 20 or below, but we'll see when I rewatch, Black Panther, WandaVision, Shang-Chi. Maybe those will end up leapfrogging, and it'll just kind of shove the Ant-Man movies down. But this is where I have the Ant-Man movies slotted. I really, really like them. They're really, really entertaining. So I got Ant-Man at number 20. Villain scale. So if you're new to the show or you need a refresher on what the villain scale is, this is where we rank the villain of each Marvel movie based on the performance of the actor, the costume design, and then the kind of motivation of the actual villain. So the performance. Not a big fan of Corey Stoll as Yellowjacket. I'm not too familiar with Corey Stoll, The only thing I really know him in was this, United 93, which is a retelling of the Twin Towers. And then, of course, Netflix's House of Cards. I think that's where I first saw him in, was House of Cards. And then he was cast as the villain in Ant-Man. And then that's really all I know him from. I'm not the hugest fan of him. I think he's an okay actor, but his performance was just not really that entertaining or stellar. Very cookie cutter, very generic villain, like a lot of these early Marvel movies were, as they were trying to develop and shape what they really wanted out of a Marvel villain. Definitely not on the same level as like Thanos or Loki or even Winter Soldier. So not the greatest in the performance department. I do like the design of the villain, the Yellowjacket version, not the Darren version. Darren is just, your typical suit. But the Yellowjacket armor suit was really cool with the laser feet or arms or whatever, the antennas, the design of the mask with the yellow and the black. I do like the design of the suit, so that's what kind of made it entertaining for me. And the motivation behind the villain, like I said, very cookie cutter, very generic. He's pissed off because Daddy wouldn't trust him, Daddy being Hank Pym, and he's having a temper tantrum, and he's like, fine, I'm going to steal it, and I'm going to do it myself. Very generic, not really entertaining. So I'm giving the Yellowjacket, a.k.a. Darren Cross, 2 Thanos heads. I thought about going 1, but the suit did save him. The suit was pretty cool. I like the action to it. I like the Yellowjacket as a villain in general, but it was just too cookie cutter, too generic. So I'm giving Darren Cross, a.k.a. Yellowjacket, 2 Thanos heads on the villain scale. Now the popcorn rating. This was a little tougher too, but I landed on 4 popcorn buckets for the popcorn rating. I think that is solid. I was kind of going back and forth between 4 and 5. I couldn't quite get the 5, so I landed on 4. So I'm giving it 4 popcorn buckets on the popcorn rating. Of course, I will post all of this on the social medias pages along with all the other artwork and graphics that you see on the video today. So look out for those. That'll do it for our Marvel Friday this week. That'll do it for Phase 2 of the MCU. We are heading our way to Phase 3 already. Super, super exciting. Phase 3 is quite a lengthy one. They really jam-packed this one, so we're going to be in Phase 3 for a few weeks, probably, at least 3 months maybe, depending on the schedule. But I'm super excited for Phase 3. Really, really fun time revisiting the Phase 2 and Phase 1. So go and check out those episodes if you're new to this. If this is your first episode of the show, go back and check out the cinematic archives with the rest of the MCU episodes, all the other franchises like Harry Potter, Transformers, Mission Impossible, Star Wars. We've done probably like 250 episodes on the show. So a lot of content for you to discover if this is your first episode of the show. But thank you for joining us today. We will look ahead to Marvel Friday next week with Captain America Civil War kicking off the phase 3 of the MCU. Then we'll also be kicking off another event, the Gamerverse event, where we will be reviewing 3 video game related movies. We'll start off with Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One. Then we'll jump into Edgar Wright's Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And then we'll cap it off with Free Guy starring Ryan Reynolds. I'm very excited for the Gamerverse event coming to Cinematic Reviews. So check out those episodes already. So with that, have a good weekend, everybody. I hope you enjoy the football games this week. Again, check out my football podcast as well if you are an NFL nut like I am. And I will see you all next week on the show. Later, everyone.